All right, so now that we have done some work on preparing our data, we've imported our data, we also calculated some basic graph metrics. We're going to focus on kind of cleaning up this graph over here. We're going to focus on the visual properties of the graph. Because right now, just by looking at the graph, it's kind of noisy and messy and hard to make sense of it. This would be like a bar graph with unsorted columns or random colors or something like that. So hopefully we'll gain some more insight as we clean this up a little bit. So in order to change the way the graph looks, we can do a number of things. We've got autofill columns over here. One thing we can do right away is we can change some of the layouts of the graph. This default layout is, this is the one it's going to automatically default to, but I tend to actually use the second one a little bit more because it's going to segment the graph into different little subgroups. So if you click on that and refresh it, you can already see some of the subgroups going on within this network. We have a lot of people, for example, responding to just these two people over here. And we've got another little subgroup over here. This is the News and Observer. We also have another little subgroup over here. So you can see we already have some things happening in the network that is kind of defining what this network is. So that's one way we can clean it up just a little, just by changing the layout. There are some other layouts here as well. We can use a circle. There we go. We can use spiral. I rarely use any of these. The circle I've seen actually used frequently, never the spiral though. But again, I tend to use this multi-scale layout as probably the most frequently. Okay, there we go. All right, so let's go over here to auto columns and let's do some tweaking of this. So we can change the way the edges look. We can change the way the vertices or the nodes in the network look. We can also change the way groups are displayed. We haven't calculated group metrics quite yet though. We'll get to that in a little bit. So let's focus on the edges first. We're going to change the size of the edge as a kind of rough indicator of the strength of the ties between individuals. So the wider it is, the more replies and mentions between those two individuals. So let's go to edge width. We're going to go to our edge weight that we calculated earlier. We're going to go over here to options, and we're going to have it set to the smallest number. Actually, you know what? Let's change this. We're going to set it to, I think 7 was the largest between any individuals in the graph. So let's set it to 7 because anything beyond 7, it looks like it was just self loops or tweets that were just broadcasted to no one in particular. So let's try that. We are going to, I'm going to turn that off. I'm not sure why that was on. Our smallest edge will sit at 1, so that's the way it's displayed right now. And for the stronger relationships, we're going to set that to 5 and see if that looks a little bit more reasonable. So this will give us an idea of the strength of the ties throughout the network. Let's click autofill and see what we got here. Okay, so this is interesting. So we can see that most of the mentions and replies were very minimal, probably just single tweets or single mentions. We can see that with a few exceptions, this seems to be only directed towards one person. That seems to be stronger. That's really interesting. I wonder what those tweets are about. We can see some of these self loops here are really, really thick. These must be prolific broadcasters. Action NC. What else do we have here? Lady Liberty, 1885. NC Policy Watch. So within this NC Ed network, we can see who is just Lucas Gillespie, who is kind of sending out the most tweets, just sending them out there. So it's actually not too big of a surprise that they have these responses here if they've been tweeting so much. Let's also change the color here. So we've calculated that reciprocated, whether or not the tie is a back and forth tie. So let me just show you. So over here for edges, we have whether or not this tie between these individuals was actually back and forth. So it looks like between Curriculum Blog and Lisa Milstead, it looks like this was a back and forth relationship. This relationship was reciprocated. So let's go ahead and change the color of the edge based on whether or not it was reciprocated. Let's go to edge color options. We will have it be, let's change this so it's a little bit more visible. So if it was not reciprocated, we'll have it be gray. Oh, these are not numbers. These are actually categories. There we go. So now it's just going to assign its own color. So let's click OK. That's right. These are actually not numbers. These are categories. Yes, no. What I often do is actually change the no's into a 1 and the yeses into a 0, or vice versa, and then color code it. So let's autofill those. There we go. All right. So here we go. Here's an edge that is reciprocated. So all the light blue edges were reciprocated, and then all of the dark blue edges were not reciprocated. So it looks like throughout most of this network we had very few reciprocated relationships. So there's not much actual dialogue or conversation taking place. I think we would call this more like, I think Piaget coined the term collective monologue, just people kind of talking amongst themselves basically, which sounds about like Twitter. So let's refresh this. There we go. Let me change this just a second, see what this looks like. There we go. I think I like the multi-scale a little bit better. All right, there we go. Now, I don't personally like the two colors here, so what I'm actually going to do is change this to a numerical value. I'm going to quickly do a find and replace. So I'm going to find all of the no's, and I'm going to replace them with a 0. And I'm going to match case and match the entire cell, so I'm only finding this column K and only those. And I'm going to replace all of those. Okay, so 1,100 non-reciprocated. Okay. And now I'm going to do the same thing, and all these yeses I'm going to turn into a 1. And let's go ahead and replace all those. There we go. All right, so now let's go to edges again. Let's have that be reciprocated, but now we have numerical values. So let's set that the numbers. Smallest number is going to be 0. And the largest number is 1, obviously. So let's set that there. And now, just to make this kind of pop, let's do red to indicate reciprocated. There we go. And let's autofill. There we go. That's much easier to see. So now I can see that these are reciprocated relationships and the others are not. All right. All right, so we've done the edges. Now let's focus on the vertices just a little bit. So first thing we need to do, we have a lot of options here, but first let's do something fun. Right now, all these vertices are displayed as just disk, so it's not very personalized here. Let's go over to graph options. We've got edges and vertices, so we can also change the look and feel of it through graph options, also through autofill columns. Autofill columns is usually going to be pulling from the metrics that we calculated. So let's go over to vertices. We're going to change this to an image. And since this is a Twitter network, it automatically pulls in an image file, and it's going to know where to locate it. So let's change that to image, and click OK. And now we have their actual Twitter profile pictures within this network. Oh, June Atkinson participated in this NCED chat. Okay, so that's interesting. So now we have all the images, but as you can see, everybody is kind of equal in size to one another, even though their contributions and their level of engagement, their interaction in this network has not been equal. So let's go and kind of adjust for that. So we're over back to our, here, I'll close it again. So autofill columns. We're going to change the look and feel of it. We're going to go to vertices. And let's go to vertex size. So let's just focus on out degree. So this is the number of mentions or replies to other people in this network. So kind of who's most active in interacting with other individuals, like calling them out and engaging with other individuals. So we're going to change that to based on their size, based on their out degree. So let's go to options here. We'll do smallest to largest. Let's tell it to ignore outliers again. And let's autofill and see what happens here. All right, give it just a second. Oh, there we go. Okay, that's a little bit better. Let's adjust that. Let's go to vertex size options again. Okay. 1.5 is actually pretty small. Let's switch that to 2.5. And let's bump this up to 17. A lot of this is the visualization aspect is kind of trial and error. Let's see how that looks. There we go. That's a little bit better. So now we can sort of see who's engaging with other people and to what extent. Let's do one more adjustment to our network here. Let's change our network opacity. Okay, so this is how visible you will be. So if you are opaque, you'll be completely solid, and then if you are less opaque, you're not going to show up as clearly. So we're going to set that on in degrees. So these are how many people who have mentioned you or who have replied to you. So the people who are getting the most replies and the most mentions are going to be the most visible in the network. So we can think of them as kind of maybe influencers in the network or the discussion starters or people kind of getting the most attention. So we're going to set the opacity to, let's change our options here, smallest to largest. We'll tell it to ignore outliers again. And we'll click OK. So let's see what happens. Oh, there we go. So now we can kind of get a feel for who's getting the most attention in the network. It's actually not too surprising, too, that the people who are mentioning the most people are also the same ones who are receiving the most mentions or replies as well. Sometimes you'll see in a network, though, like the News and Observer, based on the size of out degree, he's sized as small as anybody else in the network. So he's just being mentioned or replied to. He's not actually engaging with anyone else in the network. All right, so we've done that. So what we've done so far is we've kind of visualized the strength of the relationship between individuals by the width. And we've changed the color to indicate whether or not it was a back and forth relationship, so whether or not the relationship was reciprocated or mutual. And also for vertices, what we've done is we've changed their size based on how many people they have mentioned or replied, and then their in degree by how many times they've been mentioned or replied, or by how many other people they've been mentioned or replied. So this gives you kind of an indicator of who's getting the most attention in the network. We also have an indicator of the level of, or like a visual of the level of actual conversation or dialogue taking place in the network. And we also have a kind of an indicator of kind of all these people over here just on the periphery of the network. Okay, so these self loops throughout the network are kind of bothering me a little. I actually found a long time ago a way to remove them. There's actually a formula for calculating whether or not that is a self loop or not. And then we'll be able to hide those things. So I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to post it in the Moodle as well so you'll have access to it. And then I'm just going to paste this right into this cell, and then it's going to tell me whether or not it's a self loop. So there we go. And I'm going to rename this to self loops. Self loop, and there we go. All right, so I can actually do a drop down here, and if it is a self loop, I'm actually going to tell it to hide itself. And there. Now I have no more self loops. And I can refresh this. And it should hide all of those edges that are just broadcasting and not directed to any particular individual. Oh, there we go. So now all self loops in the network are gone temporarily. I can always actually unhide those by unfiltering it as well. So I can tell it to include those self loops again as well. All right, so actually let's go ahead and bring those back for just a second. So click OK, let's refresh this graph. What I want to do is show you one more way of hiding those things, and also it's a very useful tool for other aspects of visualizing the graph. So let's go over here to dynamic filters. And we have filters for the edges, and we also have filters for the vertices as well. So let's go and do some filtering for these edges. So as you can see, we have our self loop column that we created, and one indicated that it was a self loop. So these are just the broadcast posts where they're not directed at any individual in the network. So let's remove those, and now all of those self loops are gone from the network. Also, what we can do is, if we are interested in just looking at the reciprocated relationships in the network, we can filter that out and just look at who has back and forth mentions and replies. Okay. And we can also look at the people without any back and forth replies. There we go. We can also filter this by time. So we can go to the very beginning of the network, and then we can watch the network grow over time. Wow, that was almost instant. I am wagering that this group right here was part of a formal NC Ed chat. So this was probably a chat that they had at a very specific time where everybody agreed to participate at a certain time. Actually, you can see kind of most of the activity on this graph happens right here at this time. Then as time passes, we can see that people are slowly adding on to the network. There we go. So those are some edge filters. We can also filter out based on their vertex measures. So these measures, these vertices measures over here. There we go. So let's focus just on in degree and out degree for now. So let's look at the people who have the most responses, the most replies and mentions from other people. So let's filter out everybody in the network who has no replies or mentions from anybody. These are the sort of invisible people in the network. They are now gone. So all of these people that are left are people that have at least one mention or reply from someone else. And let's see who is actually getting the most attention in this network. And again, it looks like it is this kind of core group of people right here. There we go. Wow, we have some people from replies and mentions from as many as 7 people, as many as 9. There we go. We have a really tight-knit group of people over here. So we've kind of detected a small sub-community here. Let's filter this back. Now we can look at out degree too. So who's actually responding to the most people? All right. Again, it's all part of this subgroup right here. And oh, we can filter by number of followers. So let's see these people who have who follow very few people. Who are these people in the network? Interesting. Let's see. I wonder who has the most followers here. So let's filter this out. Wow, crazy. Okay. Anyways, got a little distracted there. We can also filter it out by the people who have been on Twitter for a long time versus the people who have joined most recently. There we go. So Ed and C, even though they have joined pretty late in the game, there we go. All right, so that's dynamic filters. So that allows us to filter by time. It allows us to filter out by some of these metrics here to zoom in on the network and get a different picture, a different perspective of the network.